You're listening to the Reclusive Blogger Interviews, and welcome to episode 3 with opera singer and baritone Johnathan McCullough. On episode 3, I talk with Johnathan McCullough, who is a Grammy-nominated baritone, opera singer, and musical director. Johnathan recently premiered his production of Jonathan T. Little's Soldier Songs, which was produced by the Opera Philadelphia. He will also make his Canadian directing debut this season with a program titled Emily, centered around works written by Emily Dickinson, co-created by conductor and pianist Christopher Allen. In our chat, we discuss his work as a baritone, his work as a musical director, and we also talk about his work with the National Children's Chorus and where he thinks the future of opera will be, and so much more. So let's dive in. I usually start out with the question, how you kind of started, how you kind of came to where you are now as a creative and an artist and a singer, and just kind of go a little bit into your background and just things like that.
Yeah, well, I started off in a group called the Paulus Choristers, which then actually ended up turning into the National Children's Chorus, and so that's where I actually started singing for the first time in grade school. And then as I was in high school, I joined an opera camp at LA Opera. So I did LA Opera's opera camp, and then Pacific Opera, which was in Orange County, which no longer exists, they did an opera camp as well. So that was the first time that I had any introduction to opera, and that was the first time that someone said, hey, you can actually do this as a career, and there are schools that you can go to do this. And I was like, really? So that was my first introduction to opera, and that led me to auditioning for all sorts of programs, and I ended up going to the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia for 7 years to get my undergrad, grad, and postgraduate degrees. And then was fortunate enough to start working across Europe and America and UK.
I guess maybe kind of go back a little further.
Well, when
Was
I
there
was
anything?
born, no,
Yeah. No, not that far.
not that far.
But
Okay.
I guess maybe kind of as a young child or early teen, was there anything in your childhood that kind of maybe like a pivotal moment or an artist that you kind of looked up to?
Yeah, I think. Well, my grandpa was Italian, and he wanted me to sing an Italian song. That was like a really big thing he just wanted. So I ended up doing an Italian song at a school talent show when I was in like 6th grade, and that was kind of actually a pivotal moment. I was in the chorus at that point, and now I was starting to really go, okay, I really like singing, and I enjoy the experience of singing. So I'd say that was a pretty pivotal moment. The opera camp was a pretty pivotal moment in my life journey and career, because that was the first time that someone basically gave me the go ahead and said, this is something you can do. So that was a very influential moment. And then I'd say, growing up listening to classical music and opera, which I never really thought that I would be interested in, I realized how cool it actually could be when you strip away the like stereotypical things that people usually associate with it. Bryn Terfel is somebody that I've always just like loved his voice and followed his career. I actually got to see him live in Paris this past summer for the first time, and it was just, an incredible experience to see him both act and sing, and and he was doing Scarpia and Tosca at Paris Opera, and it was just like kind of the culmination of years of listening to him on YouTube and on Spotify, and hearing him live for the first time. I was like, oh my god.
To kind of go back on what you said, because that was one of the questions I have. Um, for people that may kind of feel that opera is a bit unapproachable, can you kind of go into some of the things that you might um say, or I guess what are some of the artists that you would say are maybe more approachable for somebody that may not understand some of the mechanics of opera?
Well, I think that what's good about opera is that you don't even need to understand the mechanics of things. I think the main thing that scares a lot of people are the language barrier, and saying like, I don't speak Italian, I don't speak German. The thing is, these shows are universal themes that no matter who you are or what your background is, chances are there's something that you're going to relate to on a human level. So that paired with both beautiful and dramatic, and just I mean, kind of like, you want to talk about like a bass drop. Like, classical music has some of the most like mic drop moments in music. Um, it's just that you got to give it a chance and you got to go. And when you experience it, there's the other thing is that I think a lot of people go, I don't know what to wear. It doesn't matter. You can wear anything. It really is not uh, as stuffy as people kind of conceive it to be. And it's kind of just like, it's like, oh well, there's that one dish of food that I've never like really tried, and then you try it and you're like, wow, this is actually amazing. I can't believe I missed out on so many years of this because I had this preconceived notion about it. Try that food and maybe you find your new favorite food. you know
Yeah, I
there's also a lot of modern operas that are in English. There are a lot of older
mm-hmm.
operas that are in English too, but these are, I mean, these are like Hollywood stories. They are jam packed with twists and turns on the narrative level that rival any Hollywood blockbuster. And the soundtrack is being performed live and in person. So if you like those, if you like going to the movies, or you like going to live theater in general, and think about the power of a movie soundtrack, but that's coming from an orchestra pit right there as the people are singing into your face with these stories that are just incredible stories. Opera is actually quite exciting. It's just, I think it gets a, this kind of unapproachable vibe where you
Mm-hmm.
just got to break that and just give it a shot. So that would be my advice: is give it a try. Go to one of the ones that are like maybe a new modern thing,
Mm-hmm.
um, or one of the classics. Just ask around. You can even ask Google. What are the best operas for a first timer to see? And there are a lot of opera companies throughout the United States. Chances are there's one near you, and chances are they're doing something soon. So I'd go check it out.
And since you mentioned that, I guess I kind of want to ask you, this is actually one of my questions on here. Who are some of your favorite companies, or I guess operas now that you feel people should check out or see, or you just like yourself?
Um, so I've done a lot of work with Opera Philadelphia. They've
Mm-hmm.
been kind of spearheading the industry in creating new works. They've been very instrumental in my career, uh,
Mm-hmm.
as far as new works as well. They have a whole program that is devoted to nurturing composers that are alive and workshopping their works and turning them into operas. That's where you see Missy Mazzoli, who has a lot of big things coming up. David T. Little, who I did Soldier Songs with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Tyshawn Sorey, who won a MacArthur Genius Award grant. I mean, like, this is where they give them that opportunity to like flex those muscles and say, hey, what do you want to write? Write it. And then from that has come, I mean, you know, maybe 15 new operas that have been added to the canon, all with varying topics, again, that are these universal human feelings that get people to become interested in opera in the first place.
And since you mentioned that, I guess we can go in. We can now go into some of the work that you are doing now,
Sure.
and talk a bit about first soldier songs, and then I guess kind of your other work that you're doing now. So let's kind of talk about soldier songs and how that came to fruition. And I know that if I'm correct, I don't want to say something that's not right,
Yeah, yeah.
but the way, yeah, that was a reworking of of an older opera, and you put that into a cinematic form, and I found that very interesting, and I just wanted to kind of know the difference between what I guess traditional opera and then what kind of cinematic opera kind of does, because yeah, I just kind of let's start off with that.
Yeah. So soldier songs came out of my wife works in mental health.
Hmm.
So I'm very interested in that and how that affects people. Uh, I had worked with David T. Little, who is a composer. During
Hmm.
our time at Opera Philadelphia, I was an emerging artist and he was a composer in residence. So I did some expert excerpts of his with Opera Philadelphia. We got to meet each other. I really liked his style of music. Um, so I found that he had an opera that was a one person opera called Soldier Songs. And I listened to it and I was like immediately taken with it. It's not your typical opera in that, it has a varying amount of styles where everything from Limp Bizkit esque to like heavy metal rock. Like David wanted to write his he always says his like dream was like, I wanted to write horror movie soundtracks. And he's like a metalhead. So
Hmm.
he found his way into opera composing, and it's just kind of like led to a really cool style of composition that makes him very unique. So he wrote this opera. Soldier Songs was basically is the chronicalizes the one version of a veteran's narrative from childhood to uh, adulthood. So in the score, it goes from age 6 to 66. Um, so it starts off with, I want to be a real American hero, and he has a GI Joe or something, and then the next one is, he's a teenager playing video games, and it's like shoot the buttons, aim to kill, and then we go into the time where he's actually in service, and then realizes that real life in a tank is not quite the same as a video
Yeah.
game.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
Um, and then we have the elder who, I don't want to give things away, but has a very unique experience in his own right, as far as what he's experienced. So, what I learned a lot through researching about veterans' mental health is that PTSD is a common manifestation, and how that manifests itself actually often is through dissociative episodes where it's quote you see yourself in a movie. So I thought it would be interesting to take the story, instead of setting it over 66 years or 60 years, rather to set it over about 2 days and have this be a dissociative episode where the elder the entire time is reliving his entire life, and he lives in a secluded trailer park just by himself, not really trusting anyone anymore. Um, and he sees his life kind of flash before his eyes, from when he was a kid playing with GI Joe to when he was uh, playing video games, to then his trailer turns into the tank that he was in combat in. Um, and then we find him where he is currently, and that's how the opera ends in that state. So you see kind of the progression of um, how quickly things can change in someone's mind, and that's kind of what I wanted to get across in making it a film. I originally conceived it to be a live production. The idea being, looking at it from a producer mindset, I said, opera is an expensive art form, so how can we make it not expensive, yet still visually appealing and impactful? So I thought, all right, if this is set in a trailer park, all we really need is a trailer and like a table and a grill and like a turf grass thing. So I said, if we can make it so that the front yard of the trailer can be packed up into the trailer and it travels with a couple practical lights, and then we can talk ahead of whatever venue we're going to and see what the lighting board is capable of. We can actually pull into a theater in the morning, do a light focus and sound check in the afternoon, and then perform the show at night, and then get out of there and go to the next place. The idea being we could spread this message of mental health awareness and creating empathy and sympathy to what some veterans go through. Because I thought I understood PTSD. I had no idea until I learned a lot more about it. And so my goal with this is, I felt like, how can I help people in this field like my wife does? Because I can't do what she does, right? But as an artist, I can at least spread the word about
using your platform,
mental health, using my platform and spread the word of mental health awareness, and at the very least create empathy and sympathy for people going through a situation different than your own. So originally it was a live show, and then with it being right in the midst of COVID, like pre-vaccine, we thought it would be safer to do as a film, which ended up being, that was the choice of Opera Philadelphia, and I'm so glad that they did do that, because it paid off, because we were able to basically capture this thing and have it live on forever, as opposed to it being, 5 performances and then it's gone.
Do you feel that you would do that you will wind up doing more work like that, or do you feel that, because I'm trying to familiarize myself with more of this because I find it fascinating, or do you feel that other people in your work will do more like that? And that's my first question.
I mean, I think that, especially in this, not that we're post pandemic per se, but like in this current world, I think that the trend is going to be a lot more artist driven work that people are passionate about. I teach a lecture called Marketing Yourself as a 21st Century Musician, that I basically go, okay, so you as an artist have much more of a voice than you might realize. And I say, you love singing, obviously. You're here because you love singing. But what else do you love? And I had one person say, like, oh, I love trains. I was like, okay, so what if we combined those interests and you found an opera set on a train, and then you talk to a composer friend of yours, because this whole industry, this music business, is all built upon connections and who knows who, and like friendships, and just like any industry, really. So if you say, all right, here's a composer friend of mine who also happens to love trains, like fill in the blank, whatever, right? And you put together a show, and then you say the one reason that someone would maybe say no to an idea is usually money. So how do you find a way to make that idea less expensive? Because my idea, like with Soldier Songs, the set and the costumes cost an average of it's like $5,000, when your typical opera set is close to like anywhere from $100,000 to like $700,000 for the set, depending on how elaborate it is, right? So if we can find a way over that hurdle, the possibility of you getting your vision done is a lot more likely. So in this class lecture that I teach, I basically try to help people find like what it is that they could start talking about, that they're really passionate about. Because also, if you're passionate about something, your drive is going to be like 10 times more so going forward than if it's something that you're assigned to. And so I really want to kind of and then I teach them basically how to put together a pitch deck. You say, this is how to organize your thoughts, because no one can see it as clearly as you do in your head. My thing with Soldier Song started off as a sticky note with a stick figure, and I saw the final version in my head from that sticky note, but obviously it's very hard to show someone a sticky note and be like, this is going to be really cool, trust me. So then I talk about how to organize those thoughts, put them down on paper. You talk to your team. You get feedback. You change things up a little bit so you have an outside perspective, and then you can start clearly talking about what you want to try to pitch to companies.
And I guess I kind of want to go into more about your work um, as a director with opera, and I know you did a program with, I'm not even going to try to say the name because it's in French, but you did a program work with using Emily Dickinson poems that I thought
Yes, that's
were
actually
really
coming. That's
fascinating.
coming up.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so that's at Opera de Montreal on
Yes,
April 5th.
that's the one that I
Yeah,
find.
the Atelier Lyrique is doing
Okay, yes.
this program. So a friend of mine named Christopher Allen, who's a
Mhm.
brilliant conductor and also happens to be a brilliant pianist, we co-created this show about Emily Dickinson using song cycles that already existed. So there's an
Mhm.
Aaron Copland song cycle, who's this famous composer, and he set music to Emily Dickinson poetry. And then there's another famous composer who is still alive named Ricky Ian Gordon, who also
Mhm.
said, Emily Dickinson poetry, I'm going to set this to music. And these are two brilliant song cycles. So what we do is we kind of say, all right, this is a little bit of like what Emily Dickinson's life was kind of like. And all of a sudden we say, well, let's have instead of just having a concert where you stand in the crook of the piano,
Mhm.
let's put, a desk, a lamp, a chair, and stage it so that we can actually kind of see, the audience gets a sense of, this is what Emily Dickinson's life was kind of like. She lived a very secluded lifestyle.
Mhm.
Um, you know,
It was basically her in her room just
right.
writing at a desk.
And that's what
Yeah.
this whole thing is basically set at Emily Dickinson at her desk.
Mhm.
Um, and then people come in and out of her life, and those are the other characters in the song cycle. But they, each person basically just sings these songs throughout the song cycle, and we weave them together staging wise so that you see a narrative of what Emily Dickinson maybe saw her life could have been, what it actually
Mhm.
was, what she was thinking about at the time. There's a lot of stuff about nature. There's a lot of stuff about death,
Yeah.
and how she contemplated these things. So that's something that we are doing. Again, that's something that, like I talk about in my lecture, I say, all right, well, here's a creative, like, we could just do a concert of those songs standing at the piano, and there would be nothing wrong with that. Like, that's a totally viable option. But for the price of a desk, a chair, and a lamp, and then we add some lighting that's already going to be in the space, you now have a full extra show added onto the
Mhm.
season, um, that really just cost the price of a desk and a chair and a lamp.
It's like added atmosphere, and it kind of,
Exactly.
it's a whole mood and the whole aesthetic, especially if you know anything about Emily Dickinson
Hmm.
and her life, then it really kind of adds to the whole, I guess it adds to the whole sonic atmosphere as with the music and everything.
Yeah, I kind of think of like, so I'm also fascinated with film, obviously, and what's interesting is, like, on your typical movie, it'll be shot, and then, like, as they're shooting or towards the end of shooting, whatever, they start getting in touch with composers, and they say, here's the film, here's the final cut or close to the final cut, add music to this. So it's like, you have a big whooshing arm, and it has to be like, and the music has to complement what's happening visually. I kind of work backwards as an opera
Mhm.
director, and I say, what's the music, and then I close my eyes and I go, what's the movie I'd want to see accompanied to this music.
Mhm.
um, so that's kind of how I work as far as when I'm directing things, how I see it, and it plays itself out that way. Which is what I did with Soldier Songs. I listened to it and I said, "This is what I see happening here," and the visuals are driven by what's happening sonically.
And to Well, I want to just kind of back up a bit because on the Emily Dickinson thing, I first want to ask you, do you have a favorite poem of hers? And is there a specific poem that you feel just kind of fits the the world at the moment. Because I know, since you mentioned already, she did speak a lot about nature, and a lot about, I know, mortality. And I do know specifically now, and also you did also mention that, with the soldier songs, that that was specifically on mental illness and everything. And I also think that with Emily Dickinson, there was a lot to do with, I guess, maybe with her. It's not so much speculating that she did kind of suffer from mental illness because she was in the room, or just kind of stay within her room a lot. And so,
Hmm.
like, that would be my next question, my next two questions for you.
I mean, so it's it's interesting with her because, like, you know, also mental health
Yeah.
back then was a very different story than what it is
Yeah.
today.
Uh-huh. Yeah, especially
um,
with her being female.
right, exactly. So it's like, you know, in the back in the day, a lot of times it was like, oh, the woman has hysteria, which, like,
Yeah, I know.
like, we're like, oh my god, there are so many things that were just like not
Right.
handled correctly, but because they didn't know.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so I mean, there's things like, I felt a funeral in my brain is kind of interesting the way she talks about things there.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I'm trying to think. Why do they shut me out of heaven is kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Uh, Heart, we will forget him. There's some interesting things maybe in what she was actually feeling as far as romantic interests. Um,
Yeah, she was clearly way ahead of her time. Like,
yeah, exactly. And it's
yeah.
like that. Those are some of the things that we explore in the staging of this, and
Mhm.
we haven't actually. I have a staging plan generally mapped out, but we haven't worked. Once I meet the artist, it'll also um, probably change. I think the thing is, a director, it's in what I like to do is have a general idea, but be adaptable to change,
Mhm.
given whatever context. Because, like, this singer may come in with a certain idea, and I might be like, you know what, that is actually, like, wonderful. Let's run with that. Because being a singer myself, I know that I spend, like, an incredible amount of time on my role or whatever it is, and I have
Mhm.
a lot of ideas to bring to the table. And I think the best result usually comes within sort of a collaboration. Of course, it's like,
Yep.
whenever if I'm hired to be a singer, I'm like, if the director wants to work in that way, great. If they don't want to work in that way, great. Like, my job is to fulfill their um vision of whatever it is that is. And I've worked with directors who are like, I want you to stand here and here and do this. And I'm like, great, let's do it. And then I've worked with other directors that are like, let's try this. What do you think here? And it it changes, and there's not a right or wrong way to do it. But I think the basic thing of being able to go with the flow a little bit and figure out in
Mhm.
a rehearsal room everyone's style so that you can get the best result.
And I know that you just mentioned that you love film. What is it about um films, and I guess the art of filmmaking, that you love so much? And is there a specific um film soundtrack that you feel, that you kind of maybe take inspiration from, I guess, when you're either directing? And I
There,
don't want to,
I
like,
wouldn't say that there's like a film soundtrack per se that I take like inspiration from. It's kind
mhm,
of like I listen to each piece, and when if I'm thinking, because I usually like to direct things that are musically set already, because, like, my
mhm,
background is in focus in music. Um, so I usually go like, okay, this is this piece, and what can I do with this? Even if it's not even like, if I'm just casually listening to something, I'm like, you know
mhm.
what, I see this in my head. Um, and then I'll start going, all right, well, maybe let me put together a pitch deck for it and shop it around to some places. Um, but yeah, I mean, just the idea that e- with live versus film, I think that both
Mhm.
have unique things that one can do that the other can't. Um, on one hand, there's nothing like experiencing live theater with a group of people that you're all experiencing the same thing at the same time, the energy that comes from that. But I'd say with film, you can get a sense of intimacy that you can't get in a giant theater. There's also just the close-ups, the fact that you can go from one world to another world in the blink of an eye, as opposed to having like 15 people backstage move a giant wall and try to shape another thing in. But so it's not that there's one that is better than the other. I think that both offer unique things that fill a need for audience members.
I just like to know more about when you were working with Renee Fleming, and I thought that was really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, so that was part of the Carnegie Hall song studio program that she runs. So she selected, I think it was like 15 of us, and then her whole thing that week was teaching us to think outside of the box and say, like, look, the art song in America is a hard sell, just the way that we grew up. Right. In Germany, you go there and you walk down the street and the opera singers are like posted on giant billboards and there are lines outside. As soon as the tickets are announced, people are standing in line for hours to try to get a ticket for a new production of something in 5 months from then. That's just not like the culture in America.
Yeah.
I think that kind of stems from our government funded arts is a big part of it. So the arts being fully reliant upon individual giving is a big part of that. So there's not as much money to go around. But I think it's how people are introduced to it from a young age, which is why my work with Vail Opera Camp is so important to me and the National Children's Chorus. I think that there's always this talk of audience acquisition and the audiences are dying out and we don't see the numbers coming in like we used to. And the audiences are like 70% full instead of 100% full. And it's like, how do we fix that? I think that the answer to that question is a long-term solution that's going to take a while. But I think we need to invest in youth and have them go to programs, like Vail Opera Camp and go to operas and have opera companies have programs that are specifically meant for youth to get them interested and just, like I said in the beginning of this talk, get them to the theater. Because like once they're in, chances are they're going to be fascinated. So like at Vail Opera Camp, my thing that I always say is like, look, if you do Vail Opera Camp, here's your chance to learn about opera, to learn about directing, to learn about conducting, to learn about acting, to learn about singing with an orchestra, putting on a full show. And as a byproduct, putting on an opera, you learn about teamwork, you learn about how to think creatively, how to think on the spot, how to work within a team, all things that are skills that will be useful regardless of what industry you end up going into. So like for me, when I did opera camp, that was the first time that someone told me, hey, you can do this. So that, like, one scenario, maybe we introduce the next Pavarotti to opera, right? On like the worst case scenario, which is not so bad at all, is we get someone interested in opera and they become a future patron and lover of the arts. Like that's the worst case scenario. I think that youth opera education is something that if we want to see a strong future in the industry, is something we can't afford not to invest in.
Yeah, and I to kind of add on to that, I also think at times too here it's also exposure and also like you and also just access, exposure, sometimes financial too.
And like that's part of like at Vail Opera Camp, we have a robust scholarship fund for students in need. So like we never want someone to not be able to go to the program because they can't afford. Like money will not be the issue as to why you cannot attend.
Yeah. And since you mentioned the Vail Opera Camp, I know that you also are the program director at the National Children's Chorus, and I like to know more about that.
Yeah, so the National Children's Chorus was the chorus that I started in. It was just called the
Mm-hmm.
Paulus Choristers at the time.
Okay.
So that's where I discovered my love of singing. The
Mm-hmm.
National Children's Chorus started in Los Angeles and now has grown to 8 chapter cities
Wow.
throughout the country. Um, and they actually just won a Grammy last year, being part of Gustavo Dudamel's recording for best choral and orchestral. I believe it was for best. It was for a Mahler recording. So they just launched this opera program, of which I'm the opera program director, where
Mm-hmm.
we run Vail Opera Camp, which is a chance for kids to learn about all the aspects of opera and get
Mm-hmm.
introduced to it from an early age. Again, also being able to, if that is something they're interested in going into, give them a step up, a step ahead of the game, so that by the time they go to college and are getting ready to audition, they're like, I've been in 3 operas already before they even go to college, or I've had podium time in rehearsal as an opera conductor at age 16, which is unheard of. Now we do
Mm-hmm.
this in a way that it's, under mentorship and guidance. And so if it can really be a learn by doing atmosphere, which is something that I learned at Curtis. I learned by doing. My first year I was thrown on
Mm-hmm.
stage in October in a lead role. And it was like, here you go do it. And that's how I ended up doing. We did 4 operas a year for 7 years. So by the time I
Wow.
left school, I had actually already performed a lot of the repertoire that I ended up doing in my career, as I'm still doing, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to it being the first time. Like the first time I did Count in Marriage of Figaro was at school. So the time that I did it at English National Opera, it was my, 5th time performing the role, as opposed to like, it's my first one. Oh my God. Um, so we basically want to give students that chance to get real world experience,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can learn about, you know, stagecraft and acting and even prop design, so they get a really well rounded education in that time period, and then can decide what they want to do. And if they, again, like if they don't choose to go into opera, then they still have learned all these skills that you get from putting on a show, and the teamwork and the working together and problem solving, all things that will help in other fields. So we have this the National Children's Chorus, and then in Vail, Colorado, each summer. This year, it's from August 1st to August 10th. We're doing a show called The Tinker of Tivoli, which was a show that I actually did myself when I was in opera camp when I was 16 years old. And it takes music by Rossini from like Barbara Seville and
Mm-hmm.
Cenerentola, Cinderella, and puts it into the story of The Gallant Tailor by the Brothers Grimm. So we have
Mm-hmm.
basically kind of like a fairy tale that's hilarious, set to the music of Rossini, but in a way that teenagers can sing it. Um, so it's really like giving them all those tools in one spot.
And I guess I want to ask you more about how performing opera for you personally
Mhm.
and has I want to know more about some of your earlier times when you were just learning to perform it and how that was fun for you and things like that. That's what I kind of want to know more about. And what has kind of been the most rewarding experience for you so far, and just kind of more about your voice because I know you're a baritone, but I'm not quite um, sure the technical aspects of that. But and just kind of what are your favorite operas to perform, and just more aspects of that um, part of your career.
Yeah, so I mean, Curtis Institute of Music had a big impact on me as far as that goes. Um, I'd say one of the most memorable experiences I had there was performing the role of Dr. Atomic in Dr. Atomic, which is the story of the Manhattan Project. So I was J.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Oppenheimer. And that was a pretty big, like, c- pivotal moment in my career where I was like, this is what I want to do. I
Mm-hmm.
really love modern music. I love interpreting things in a way that is not your. It was not set in a Manhattan Project esque look aesthetically.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that. Um, that was the last thing I did before I went off to uh, sing in Europe. I did some shows at Komische Oper Berlin, Opera de Lausanne, and in Switzerland, and that was kind of like the thing that was my send off from Curtis, which was like, okay, here's a big lead role that took me like a year to prepare, um, and that really was like it was kind of like my senior thesis, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's it's a little non-traditional, but that's really what was most pivotal in saying you're now able to go out and do this
Mm-hmm.
um, in the real world, because what Curtis did was it set it up so that the school environment mirrored the real world environment, so that
Mm-hmm.
transition was quite smooth, not a culture shock in like going,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
this is a totally different thing than school. It was actually pretty much the same as school, because the
Yeah.
school ran it like a professional company, which is how I'm modeling Vale Opera Camp after the Curtis way of doing things, because that's where I received my education, and that's this learn by doing atmosphere that I really want to cultivate.
And I guess you kind of already mentioned that, but I would what advice would you give to anybody that is wants to go into this profession, whether they're a musical director or a singer or performer, any aspect to this profession?
I'd say, well, it depends on age, right?
Okay.
Um, it's not too late, depending on any, no matter the age, right? It's just what path
Mm-hmm.
do you take at what age? If it's high school or even younger, um, come to a program like Vale Opera Camp. Come,
Yeah.
come let us show you the ropes and experience what putting an opera on is like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, the other piece of advice I'd say is go see as much as possible,
Mm.
um, from different places. Some of the most inspired that I've ever felt was being in Berlin and seeing shows multiple times a week at three different opera houses, all within a mile of each other, that are three of the biggest opera houses in the world. I mean, they're all three of them are. There's the Deutsche Oper Berlin, Komische Oper Berlin, and Staatsoper Berlin. Those three houses produce world class productions, all of really varying style, types of repertoire, and types of direction. Um, Go see as much theater as you can. Literally, just go out and see as much as you can, absorb as much as you can. Um, I mean, that's where I end up getting a lot of my ideas, is just seeing something and going like, you know what, this would be a good idea for the. I went to go see that Van Gogh exhibit, the immersive Van Gogh thing.
Oh, I went to see that as
Yeah.
well. I love that because Van Gogh is like, well, Van Gogh is literally one of the biggest inspirations for me as a artist and
Mm.
a photographer.
Hmm.
So I as soon as that opened up, I was like there. I
Right.
loved it.
Exactly. And I was like in that big room with the projections going. And I was
Mm-hmm.
seeing the letters being written. I said, you know, what'd be really cool is if there was a song cycle where the text was his letters to his brother. And I was like, that seeing that exhibit kind of got me thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I go to the gift shop. Turns out it already existed. It was on sale there. And then that composer actually, uh, just by happenstance, because it's a very small industry, was
Yeah.
the composer of the opera that we did last year at Opera Camp. So I started talking about
Mm-hmm.
it. I said, you know, I actually had this idea, and then I heard your song cycle. I had the idea for this thing that you did 10 years ago. So I was a little 10 years too late, but it let me know that I was on the right track. Um, uh, but then I was like, you know what? We should look about making this into a film. So then we put together a film deck and we're pitching that around. Because and that's how these things just kind of get going. It's because I went to go see one thing, it sparked an idea for another thing, which sparked an idea for another thing, and so on and so forth. And then I'd say that's my biggest piece of advice: is go out and see as much as you can.
Yeah, and then also, since you mentioned Van Gogh, I think another thing too is that just because you do one type of art doesn't mean that you can't absorb another type of art. Because I mainly just do
Oh
like,
yeah, no, I mean, like I've
yeah,
seen some
yeah,
weird plays in like the back
yeah,
alleys of London that I was like, this
yeah.
is really cool, and something that like a friend took me to that I never would have thought I would go to.
Mhm. Yeah, because a lot of my inspirations tend to come from, like, as I said, Van Gogh, and a lot of them come from music, but I don't really do music or and
And
create,
that's
like,
the thing
cannot
about
sing.
music, especially, is you
Yeah.
don't need to know anything about it to enjoy it. And most
Yeah.
art, pretty much all art, actually, you
Yeah.
don't actually need to know anything about it to enjoy it,
You just have
which
to
is what's
love
great.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and because I'm a photographer and I'm a writer and I do the podcast, but I tend to find most of my inspirations from other artists. And but yeah, that Van Gogh, it was fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a big Van Gogh poster on my wall in my bedroom
Oh,
because
nice.
yeah, he's I don't know, it's just something about his art and how vivid it is.
Hmm.
I just I don't know what he was thinking back then, but it's just kind of sad that he never got his due when he was alive.
Right. I mean, and it's, I think, imagine how many artists
Mhm.
uh, like that have probably been around
Yeah.
that were either never given a chance during their lives and after their lives. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like, when you think about like the universe and how expansive that is, like I bet you the same kind of thing exists when, as far as like thinking about how many artists are out there that have created just museum worthy stuff
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we may never know.
Yeah. I to be honest, I try not to think about that
Yeah.
because there's so many, so
But
many.
then the
But
point being, though, go out and support some local artists
yeah.
and go out
Uh-huh.
and see as much as you can. And
Yeah.
what if you were the one that discovers them? Like I just saw this band. I certainly did not discover them, but I just um, heard about them for the first time, called the Scarlet Opera. Like I started listening to them yesterday. They are
Mhm.
fantastic, and I am like obsessed. um, and they were just on the Late Show with James Corden the other day.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Uh-huh.
and and I'm like, I've listened to those 3 songs that they have on Spotify on repeat, and I'm waiting for some more stuff to come out. And being there at, like, this isn't necessarily the beginning of their journey, but like, but uh I get excited telling people about, so like, we've never met, but I'm telling you about this band and you should check them out. I have no I don't know them. I don't know them personally, but like I texted like 10 of my friends, said, "Have you heard these people? Like check this band out." And just that form of excitement and experiencing art for the first time. It's like, when somebody
Mhm.
uh when you're like, "Oh, you haven't seen that movie? Oh, I'm so jealous you get to experience for that for the first time." Um Going out and seeing new art is one
Yeah.
of the most satisfying experiences that there are.
Yeah, and with my podcast and my blog, that's literally all I started it for, was to just be like, because there's so many artists and bands
Yep.
and that I love, but I just realized I need to do more than just
I mean, you're doing it
tell
right
my
now,
friends.
basically using your
Yeah,
platform to
yeah,
show
uh-huh,
people like, "Hey, here's something you never maybe would have thought about, but check it
yeah,
out."
uh-huh,
So I
yeah,
mean, so
yeah.
thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I've the amount of people that I had telling me that, I'm like, I just like this artist or whoever, and it's kind of grown to something that I never actually would have dreamed of.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to ask you a few I guess since we're on art, a few fun questions. You kind of already answered one, which was the Scarlet Opera, but
Mhm.
do you have any more, I guess, musicians or maybe some podcasts that you've been just kind of listening to lately?
Yes, I love listening to Greta Van Fleet. Greta Van
Oh,
Fleet. Yes, I love listening to Greta Van Fleet. The Scarlet Opera is a new band that I've just discovered, and I love listening to them. Moinskin is a band I really like.
oh, I love them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen them live. They're amazing. I've
Oh,
actually
really?
met them
Oh my god. See,
actually.
I
Yeah.
really want to see them live. Glenn Hansard,
Yeah.
I love listening to. So I listen to a lot of different style stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
um, my first love was like rock, and
Mhm.
I also really love um acoustic folky kind of stuff. So that's what I listen to mostly in my free time.
Yeah, I went from being like a pop kid from a little bit. Like I was really really into NSYNC for like from when I was 12, 11, 12, and then I just made like this drastic transition from NSYNC to where I was just heavy into rock music from
Hmm.
uh a teen. And then yeah, that's what I grew up on as a teenager was a lot of rock music like MCR, AFI,
Yep.
30 Seconds to Mars, a lot of that stuff. And I still listen to a lot. Rock is where I kind of grew up
Yeah,
on.
my dad my dad introduced me like James Brown, so I would listen to James Brown going to kindergarten. And then he introduced me to like the Who and the Stones and that kind of stuff. So that's where my musical interest kind of like started. And then it somehow veered off into opera. But they're both like they both have a flair for the dramatics, you know what I mean?
What is your earliest musical memory?
My earliest musical memory is probably listening to James Brown on the way to school as a little kid in the back
Okay,
seat.
that's cool. Yeah, I know. I think my I got a lot of if a lot of the R&B music and soul and stuff I got from my grandparents and my mom. They listened to that
Hmm.
and stuff. And yeah, because I my mom told me this really cool story where when she was little and she got to see it was the guy that it was the artist that sings "Hit the Road Jack," and for some
Ray
reason they like
Charles.
that. Yeah, Ray Charles. Thank you.
Yep,
Wow.
yep.
Yeah, Ray Charles front row when she was like 5
Oh
because
my
he did
goodness.
a performance on my grandpa when he worked at college at a college campus. So he did like a college campus
Oh
performance.
wow.
And so and I was like, that's insane. But yeah, she was just front row there.
Wow.
Insane.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. I know. I know. Question is how do you see opera shifting in the next 5 or 10 years? And yeah, where do you see yourself in the next 5 or so years?
Um yeah, I think that opera is really going to become have this industry shift of artist driven projects. I think that's going to be a big thing in the next 5-10 years is kind of what I am predicting. Um, Slash is already happening. People like
Mm-hmm.
Anthony Roth Costanzo and Julia Bullock, who are two brilliant artists. Um, they are the creative forces behind a lot of their projects. I would love to keep singing. I'd love to keep directing. I see my position with this with the National Children's Chorus as the opera program director. We're looking to grow this program to be able to give youth opera education to as many people as possible. And that's something I really want to grow over the next 5 to 10 years, and basically make it so that we can give opportunities to as many young people who are interested in going into performing as possible.
Well, awesome. That is what I hope happens because I'm always for more uh different types of music being accessible to more people.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank
Well,
you for sitting
if
down
you're
with
interested
me.
in following more, follow us at Vale Opera Camp. That's my official plug. Follow us at Vale Opera Camp on Instagram.
Great. Okay. Once again, you have been listening to the Reclusive Blogger interviews. See you in the next episode.